Welcome to another Founder Wisdom podcast. We have Charlie Liu. I pronounce that right. She's
correct.
an investor in female founders, an engineer, scientist, serial entrepreneur. She wears a lot of hats, works at a bunch of companies, and I like that. Venture partner at Sibylla Masters Fund, Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, executive director at Darwin's Arc. She's a bunch of things, and we're going to discuss about a variety of things today. So I'm going to have fun, and so are you. This podcast is brought to you by potfire.com. If you want to start, scale, be invited to podcasts like this one, you can go to my agency's website, potfire.com. And without further ado, we'll jump right in. Charlie, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you're into nowadays?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Charlie Liu. I am a serial entrepreneur, but have branched into investing. My last company was a unicorn. So after that, I wanted to figure out what to do. And I had remembered my entrepreneurial experience and journey over the last 20 years. And as a female, as a person of color, it had been suboptimal, let's just say, when it comes to venture capital funding. And so I wanted to take the money that I've made and invest it in a way that really makes impact for other underprivileged entrepreneurs. So what I'm doing is trying to enrich the ecosystem in a way that's more equitable. I'm building on the front end an entrepreneurial training center for underprivileged entrepreneurs. And on the other end, I'm investing in various numbers of venture capital funds.
Tell me about your various startups first and the exits that you had recently.
Sure. Yeah, I've started and have advised probably at this point like 100 companies. The four big ones are three of which are in biotech, and the last one was in logistics, shipping logistics. The three biotech ones are still running. They're not exiting. They're just a stable running company. The last one was exited to American Eagle Outfitters in 2021, a year after we had started it. Because you start a logistics company at the beginning of a pandemic, you quickly get acquired. So a lot of it in terms of the acquisition was luck. The last company was called AirTerra. It's since become a unicorn. It is now doing, I want to say something like $500 million in revenue. It was merged with another acquisition of American Eagle Outfitter called Quiet Logistics. But the AirTerra portion of the revenue is $200 to $300 million last year. We have been told on a panel that I was recently on that it might actually be the fastest 0 to 100 million company ever. It's hard to check these because it's, data isn't readily available for this kind of stuff, but it is pretty fast to go from 0 to $100 million.
Never heard anything like that before in the pod. And tell us like precisely why, because Amazon at logistics slash warehousing, you really optimized it. The margins are thin, like you told me, and the acquisition was a couple of million, which is pretty significant in like a couple of years, not even a year or so, with a couple of partners. So tell us about the details of that one and how you got there also. That would be helpful.
Yeah, so we weren't immediately thinking about acquisition. We were definitely going after venture capital funding, but I think as I was the front person for venture capital because I was the only one who's had started companies in the past. And again, being a woman and female, being a female in the logistics space is very unusual. And then being a person of color is on top of that slightly more unusual. And so venture capital as a whole is a place, especially early stage, where you want to find things that feels familiar, and I don't feel familiar. And so we weren't getting a ton of traction with venture capital. And in the process, we were just self-funding. We were bootstrapping and self-funding. And a lot of our customers were immediately very interested in thinking about how they could bring us in to integrate into their existing system. And one thing led to another. In the middle of our venture round, American Eagle just said, stop the venture funding and we're going to just buy you. So that's basically what happened. The publicly facing portion of the acquisition, I believe, is $3 million. However, as the full acquisition, it was more than that because a lot of it is an acqui-hire situation. So the non-cash portion of it was not reported. And also part of the acquisition was a commitment to invest several tens of millions of dollars in order to bring the system up and getting it out the door. So I would say I cannot really estimate because I didn't stay. I was not one of the people who stayed through it because I'm a serial entrepreneur. I wanted to start my next thing. But my guess is that the total acquisition cost for them was probably in the upper tens of millions of dollars. So I would say $50 to $60 million was their total acquisition cost.
And what led you there? You have such a rich experience. You started at NASA, then Merck, then Amazon. And I see some PwC here as a consultant. Then I see the longest canine longevity study being done. So many experiences. Tell us about, that past of yours, and tell us about how that neurodiversity in terms of the experience that you have fetched have brought you value up to this day.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of people, when they see my LinkedIn profile, they think, wow, it's all over the place. But one thread amongst all of that is that I am a data scientist at heart. I mean, I'm a trained engineer and a biologist, but at the end of the day, I manage and process large amounts of data. And every single one of these projects is all about data analytics and decision-making based on big data. So my specialty is taking enormous amount of information and distilling it down to the thing that you need to know and taking really, really ambitious ideas and turning them into reality based on the data that I've acquired. So yeah, there is a little bit of what you call neurodiversity in here. I am a scientist, I'm a writer, I'm all sorts of things. And obviously I'm a math person, right? I mean, numbers is sort of how I live and breathe that. But at the end of the day, when you look at every single one of these things, whether or not it's me doing the International Space Station, where every single thing is unknown and you have to calculate everything before you show up, or to my PwC days where I was doing large scale, multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions for pharmaceutical companies, they're all numbers, they're all big data, they're all analytics.
Engineering, data, biotech also, I would guess. So there's, this forever debate about specializing and generalizing. I'm definitely in the generalist camp. So I don't see confusion when I see that. I see someone that's striving and someone that's driven by curiosity. Yes, you have a back end, just like my back end. I wouldn't describe myself as an engineer, but I'm really analytical and I love building systems, which is what engineers usually do. And I have a core set of skills. I call them macro skills. Then I have a bunch of micro skills as well with my background in sales, for example. I want to be focusing way more on product than any other thing. But me, I see beauty right there. I see, someone exploring their curiosities and possibly, and which leads to my next question, taking something from one science and bringing it to the other, which possibly explains why you guys went from 0 to 100 million. Because that's what the market needs nowadays. It's people that do stuff very differently. That's how you build unicorns. So tell us about your mental model and your process to get ideas, execute on these ideas, create systems that can eventually be sold as unicorns.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely my experience in biological sciences, especially in genomic sciences, really informed how I look at the world, because that was one of the first places where you have data at scales that were beyond computing power at the time, right? So I was on the first human genome project. The amount of data that we were generating by day and transmitting across the network was well beyond the capacity of computing at the time. I'll tell you a funny story. One of like my first job at the Human Genome Project, a huge part of what I did was sleeping in the server room overnight because the computers were crashed so often because the compute demands were so high. Even though I was writing code to manage the pipeline, most of what I did at night was sleeping next to the server and rebooting it. So, I mean, people love that story because it just kind of tells you how much the boundary we were pushing at the time. And since then, I've written computational platforms to analyze large scale data. And one of the things that I've started to do very early on is what people call AI, but it's actually not what I consider AI. It's basically computational analytics, model building, using computers to analyze large amounts of data and creating generative information from that. So large scale computational model is something that we've been doing in the sciences, especially the genomic sciences, since the 90s, which is something that now is being applied across the board to every single other industry. And I bring a lot of my computational background in that space to things like finance, which is starting to really leverage AI, but it's just kind of very nascent in how it looks at big data and how it derives information from that. So the same thing we're using, I mean, actually Amazon pioneered this, like using very large data to understand logistics. And same thing, I took my computational background in bioinformatics world, and leverage that into logistics, into finance, into any number of other things that I've been working on. And that's how we were able to very quickly build a unicorn, because we understand the logistics. We were able to take in the data. We were able to analyze where the failure points are and create a system that's very different than what is currently being done.
And you think you can do it again? And if so, in what field?
I think so. I mean, I think certainly in the early stage financing world where there's very limited amounts of data, there's a lot of opaqueness in how people make decisions. I am definitely proposing some new systems for us to implement in order for us to create much more transparency and in turn create more equity because of the transparency and data. So that's a project that's still, a little bit under wraps. So I will tell you more about it when it gets up and running.
The investing side of things, how do you find weird and odd founders that have similar mental models that take elements from a science and cross-pollinate it to another? How do you find these quirky traits in other founders? It's not only being weird, but in my opinion, it's being a super nerd. It's people that are really like focused, but also fetch their information in different places and have systems to filter these out and find out what is right, what is true, and what is false. So how do you find that in other founders and their business ideas that could lead you to your next unicorn investment?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so we don't necessarily just look for interesting, quirky founders. So the fund I'm mostly focused on now is a female-led, female-focused fund. And I think of it as, I think, playing Moneyball in a space where people are under investing in really high value assets. And female founders, because we tend to not look as comfortable compared to, or known compared to other, founders, we tend to be undervalued. So just as a statistic, for those of you who don't know, female founder as a class outperform their male equivalents between 20 to 60% and are undervalued by anywhere between 50 to 80%. So it is a big sort of variation. You're basically getting a high value asset for a lot less valuation. And that's actually, part of the arbitrage of any Moneyball strategy. And so we don't necessarily look for just the quirky founders. We look for any founder that's, female. And because of that, just because of the nature of funding, female founder gets only 2% of all total venture capital funding. We end up with a lot of inbounds without trying very hard. Our inbound pipeline is very, very robust. We have a lot of really amazing founders. We're actually running into the opposite problem when it comes to deployment as most venture capital funds, which is we have more great stuff that we can fund than we have funds for.
That's pretty cool. And what are trends that you're seeing, macro trends, micro trends, and potential product market fits that you've seen in some of the companies you've invested lately?
So we tend to end up focusing in on B2B SaaS, but I think as a whole, venture capital is moving towards generative type of, obviously, AI. But also from an industry trend perspective, generational health is what the World Economic Forum has coined, which is women's health, community health, which includes mental health, and environmental health, which is sustainability, and sort of green technologies. And so those three areas are seeing a lot more investments compared to the growth in other areas. To be fair, the whole venture capital space is kind of stagnant right now after the SVB debacle. But also the SEC recently had a ruling that's made it much more complicated for people, or at least advisors, to invest in this space. So there is a lot of confusion right now. So there's a lot of pulling back, but there are still sectors that are actually growing. And so those are the sectors that I'm seeing a lot of growth in. Environmental health in particular, green technology, sustainable technologies are getting a lot of interest and a lot of investment. And mental health, because of the pandemic, it's become a forefront, like something in the forefront. So there are spaces that are still seeing a lot of new investments. It just, as a whole, it is slowing down.
Talking about mental health, how does a super brain like yours does not reach that level? I see you're into some outdoor stuff, like forest bathing.
Yes, I used to be a competitive rock climber.
Oh, that's really cool. So like how do you deal with stress, and how do you make sure that you're not reaching your burnout limit?
I am on the edge of burnout almost all the time, but because I use rock climbing as an outlet, it has been an amazing way for me to deal with stress. I have to say that I've been injured lately. Ever since I turned 40, which is quite a number of years ago, I have had a lot of tendon issues. And so I have not been climbing at the same level. And it is kind of a challenge to figure out how do you deal with your stress if you don't have your standard outlets. So I don't drink, I don't use pot, I don't even drink coffee. So I don't have like substances that I can use to help with that. So it is for me all about exercise and pretty extreme exercise. So I'm actually, it's funny that you should ask. I am actually struggling a little bit to figure out what my alternative is if I can't become climbing at the level I had been climbing before. I think running is probably my next go-to, although I absolutely hate running.
Why do you hate it?
It's honestly, it's a little bit boring. It doesn't have the mental challenge that rock climbing gives you. So when you're rock climbing, it is very much a physical movement, but it's also a problem-solving exercise. You're looking at a wall, especially outside where it's not taped off for you, and you have to figure out how do you get up there using what you have, your hands and the wall.
I
So
agree.
there is very much like problem solving, a puzzle exercise to climbing.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I would add a twist though, like go with trail running. That's way more problem solving. Like where do you step your foot? Every like step is important, right? To not like make a mess out of yourself. It's more, there's more problem solving in there. And then you can
I
add
will
like
try
an
that.
audiobook to crack out problems while you're doing your running. So yeah, running is cool though because it's so simple. You know, you just take your shoes and off you go.
Yeah.
And it's
It's
always
one of the
moving
most
forward.
accessible things that people can do, actually, when
Right.
it comes to outdoor stuff. So, I mean, I really love the idea of running and I
Right.
advocate for it quite
Right.
often.
So what are your top three goals this year? How do you want to finish up the year?
Yeah, so we are launching at as you had noted that I'm executive director of Darwin's Ark, which is a companion animal health organization. We are launching the world's first citizen science cat program, which is something that cat owners have been longing for. There has always been this amazing focus on dogs, but cat owners have nothing similar. And we are doing this with amazing grant funding that's coming up. I cannot talk about it yet because it is not inked yet, but it is coming. We're launching a $10 million longitudinal program for studying cat genomics and health. So that is something that's taking up a lot of my time. And then the other part of it is I do a lot, I know there's a lot of random things, but I do a lot of big data analytics around sexual harassment and assault. And we are bringing our first serial rapist to trial, so that there's a lot of trial prep that's going on there as well. It's actually really amazing in the sense that I did not know this until somebody told me this. This case is actually precedent setting because historically, when you're a data organization, if you analyze data and you find serial perpetrators, there's nothing you could do. There's no path for big data to take somebody, to use big data to take somebody to court. But we are sort of laying the groundwork for how you take these big data systems now we have all over the world for different kinds of things and finding crimes within it and then figuring out the path to bring that into the legal system. So so there's a lot of work there as well. So there's definitely a ton of stuff that I'm working on in parallel. And then obviously I sort of noted, I alluded to earlier that I'm creating this new system for bring more transparency to the early venture systems. So so that's also ongoing as well.
Fascinating. That would be
Yeah,
another
so we've
podcast in itself, the serial rapist thing.
yeah, there is definitely a podcast. Someone wants to do a whole podcast series around this as well. And I'm just like, okay, there's a lot. I have too much going on to be doing all of this stuff.
Right.
But
Fascinating.
yeah. But yeah, so I mean, we've gotten the attention of a lot of different big organizations in each of these verticals. So like, pet food or science organization are very interested in Darwin Ark stuff. There are definitely lots and lots of organizations interested in how you bring, serial crime, into the legal system. And then the transparency in venture system is actually something that the World Economic Forum has gotten very interested in. So they're working with me to figure out how to fund that initiative. So there's just a ton of stuff.
But that's exciting for your brain, no? Like same for me. When people ask me how do you interview 15 CEOs a day, and that looks
I don't know
simple
how you
by
do it.
by the way. That looks simple by comparison what you do, but I thrive on that, especially when I interview folks like you that are neurodiverse and are into a lot of things. And, like this podcast, sometimes I try to box humans, unfortunately, because that's what the audience want and that's what our brains want to understand people. But humans are not really boxable, especially at the
Oh,
top,
no, no.
it's super hard to define someone in what situation and so forth. So thank you for sharing the value today, Charlie. Where can people find out more about you?
I mean, you can find out more about Darwin's Ark at darwinsark.org, darwinark.org. You can find out more about my serial assault victim work at safeoutsidenow.org, and the venture capital work that I do right now, you can see most of it at mastersfund.vc, masters.vc, masters.vc. You can always figure out things on my LinkedIn, so feel free to connect.
We'll check all of the above. So thank you so much. That was another founderwisdompodcast.com.